Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar in which we're going to explore some ways that we can sustain important learning relationships in online or learn from home mode. My name is Dr Katherine McLay and I'm a lecturer here at the School of Education, and we're also joined tonight by Professor Robin Gillies as a panellist, and she'll be helping to respond to your questions in the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So welcome to Robin and welcome to everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Kate. Okay.
See you at the end.
Questions.
Before we go any further, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the Turrbal and Jagera people as traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we're meeting today, and pay my respects to their ancestors and to their descendants. Now, I've got a couple of polls for you, so I'll pop them up as we go. And we'd love to, the first poll is there just to give us a bit of a sense of who's joining us tonight in this webinar, so it'd be great if you would participate in that. So in recent weeks, the COVID-19 crisis has meant that teachers and learners in every sector, from early childhood through to tertiary education, we have all had to make really profound changes to our approach to teaching and learning. And as usual, teachers have done the most extraordinary job. And this reflects a really deep professional understanding that responding to student learning needs always, but especially during a crisis such as this, involves more than adjusting programs, digitising resources, making videos, or sending home work packs to students who don't have access to technology. Although, of course, all of those things are really important. But the relationships we have with our students and the relationships that students have with one another are just as important to learning as resources and pedagogy. And a recent report developed for UNESCO, which is on the screen at the moment, also emphasises those priorities in those two short little quotes that I've pulled out there. From a sociocultural perspective, learning is a social process and it occurs through interaction with others. So for babies and young children, for example, language is learned informally, but very effectively through interacting with mum and dad, older siblings and grandparents. As children get older and then move into formal schooling and classroom settings, these learning interactions expand to include teachers and peers. So because learning involves interacting with others, having positive relationships with those others is really important. Because human learning is not a detached process that only involves neutral academic knowledge and skills. They're not just brains in a jar, but whole people. And education research has for many years consistently found that effective learning is this complex, interconnected web of academic, social and emotional factors. And as Z and Kuman contend, the quote on the screen there, student-teacher relationship patterns with high levels of closeness and emotional security can be really beneficial to students' sense of well-being. But of course, the opposite can be true as well. Just end that poll and share those results. You might like to see who you all are as well. So, of course, not one bit of this is news to classroom teachers, of course, who don't need education researchers to tell them that positive classroom relationships between teachers and students and among students are very important to student engagement and learning, and indeed critical during a crisis. But of course, one consequence of the recent COVID-19 pandemic is that we've had to make these adjustments really, really quickly, including adjustments to important relational practices. And one article that I read recently makes an important distinction between online learning and emergency remote teaching, which I think is an interesting distinction. And they note that it typically takes about 6 to 9 months to develop a fully online university course. So I don't know about those of you who are out there as teachers, but very few of us have had that kind of intentional planning time. We've just had to get on with it and do the best we can as quickly as we can. So this webinar is a chance, I guess, to pause in the middle of all of that busyness and foreground and consider some intentional ways of building and sustaining learning relationships in the current context and beyond. So we'll explore 2 key things. First, the dynamics of positive teacher-student relationships and some strategies for intentionally translating those from face-to-face into an online environment. And second, why positive peer relationships are so important to learning, and again, some strategies that we can use intentionally in an online context to nurture and support those important peer relationships. In terms of learning outcomes then, it's our hope that you will feel affirmed as a practitioner, as well as equipped with a couple more practical strategies that you can put into action or adapt to suit your context. Hopefully you can use those now during the current very demanding period, as well as when we return to some kind of normal, whatever that might look like, because very often innovation emerges from a crisis. So perhaps a question to keep in mind during the webinar is, what will you take forward from this period and incorporate into your practice when we return to the classroom? And many of you will have found some other really effective and innovative ways that you are working to sustain connections. And if you have got a strategy that you've been using that you have found has worked really well, please feel free to pop that into the Q&A section, and at the end we can share some of those illustrations of practice and we can all learn from one another. As you watch, you may find it helpful to reflect on the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. Good old SWOT is a good way of doing that, of examining those various approaches. Certainly whenever we start talking about children in the online world, a whole host of issues necessarily arise around child safety and equity of access and experience for students. And those are really important issues. And I want to make really clear that we're not trying to take an unproblematic or an uncritical view of those challenges. They are real challenges. So let's start by looking at teacher-student relationships, which are well established as having a really important impact on a child's experience of school. There is a huge body of literature that explores the features or qualities of a positive teacher-student relationship and how relational practices impact on student learning. And I've popped just some of that literature on the slide, not spending a lot of time on the theory itself in the webinar because our focus is on the practical strategies. But it is important to make clear that there is established evidence that the teacher-student relationship is important. And I really like this quote from a book by Deborah Udall that explores a lot of these issues. That idea that knowing and learning are connected and they happen together in ways that we're often not aware of, but that they're very, very important. And the references are included at the end of the slides if you would like to look at those in more detail. Now, this slide isn't going to be exhaustive, but just will capture a few of those key dynamics that tend to be common across those frameworks that were on the previous slide. So empathy, the teacher has got empathy for and understanding of student perspective, so can see the world through a student's eyes, what matters, what doesn't, able to grasp their level of social and emotional development. In the current climate, being sensitive, I suppose, to uncertainty and anxiety. An appreciation of students as whole people, not just brains in jars or of their academic performance, but their gifts and abilities, their interests and the challenges that they experience. And of course, adapting for individual and cultural difference. Positive regard or warmth so students benefit from a sense that a teacher cares about them academically and personally, that they are accepted and that they are trusted. And finally, teacher self-efficacy is key to positive teacher-student relationships. So a teacher's self-efficacy, or their sense of their own capacity, a teacher with high self-efficacy tend to be able to have more positive relationships with students, maybe because they can, maybe are better at making sense of student behaviours, even those that perhaps might be negative. So when we are face to face with our students, we have a lot of opportunities that arise quite organically to build positive relationships and create a sense of community. And this often happens in really mundane, everyday interactions that we don't even think too much about, but which are nevertheless, really very powerful in shaping students' experiences of learning in school. Teachers weave their empathy and warmth into the fabric of teaching and learning experiences through interactions that have the benefit of tone, eye contact, body language, all of those things. But this doesn't happen automatically in online contexts. In terms of learning relationships among students or between peers, it's also well established that those relationships are important to learning. A recent paper by Christakis has also explored that children's mental health is suffering as a result of isolation from their peers in lockdown. And you can read an accessible overview of his paper via the link there in Mindshift, and that is provided there on the slide for you. So students actually may need teacher support to sustain connections with one another in learn from home mode as well, informally and socially, and also through perhaps some purposefully designed collaborative and cooperative learning opportunities to support what is often referred to as social presence. So social presence theory argues that the social presence people have when communicating using mediums beyond face-to-face impacts on their experience of learning. Social presence involves salience, a sense of being important or connected to in online learning, to the class, to their peers and to the teacher. And the benefits of cultivating social presence include those dot points listed on the slide there, but we have to cultivate it and nurture it. So let's dig into the strategies. When we are thinking about strategies, remember that remote or online learning involves synchronous and or asynchronous communication and dialogue, or a strategic combination of both for particular purposes. So synchronous refers to interaction and communication that occurs in real time with no delay, while of course asynchronous refers to interaction that occurs at different times as convenient for each participant. So there's a time delay. Synchronous face-to-face communication and dialogue are often seen as the gold standard, in part possibly because as a medium, there are just more opportunities to build and nurture social presence and relationships. But asynchronous and synchronous but remote communication and dialogue can also offer opportunities to build connection and relationship as well. And both the quality and the quantity of dialogue and communication are important if our goal is to decrease students' sense of isolation and nurture social presence. So we'll have a look at some key forms of communication and dialogue, and we'll kick off with written. And on this slide, I've just curated a collection of written communication strategies that the literature indicates are effective in online learning. I suspect that most teachers already appreciate and probably practice many of those, so I won't dwell unnecessarily, but there are some nice reminders here and some references there at the bottom. In particular, the one that I've bolded in this slide about selecting our words carefully in written communications like email or course announcements, whatever medium you're using. It is actually not easy to convey our true intentions in writing, especially when we're busy and rushing, and especially when pretty much everyone that we're interacting with at the moment is in a state of heightened anxiety, including us. So if it's a hot button issue, if it's an issue or a communication that might elevate stress, then perhaps consider communicating using a different medium. In real time, that could be a phone or video call, and those are very valuable, but sometimes not always practical if you have a lot of students. So another alternative is to go beyond written communication and see how you can use multimodal tools to decrease social presence. So substituting an email with a short video message is something that I have been playing with myself, with my own students, to try and sustain a bit of human connection with my students. And I'll play you just about 15 seconds of a video that I uploaded before Easter for the final year students in one of my courses. Just a snippet, not the whole thing.
Hi everyone. The emails I'm receiving indicate that you're all working really hard on your model responses and your lesson plans, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the final product because some of the ideas that you'll come out with are just fantastic. I just wanted to reiterate a couple of things about task one, just to make sure that you're not making your lives unnecessarily difficult.
So the context of that video, and Zoom, I think we all got pretty excited about Zoom and the different things we could do with the backgrounds. But the context of this was, it was just before Easter break. I'd only seen my students for 3 weeks before we had to move online quite suddenly, and they had an assessment deadline. So I was starting to understandably get a few emails. I did have an FAQ page on my course website, but I decided to just make a short video. I think it was only about 4 or 5 minutes long, that explored their questions in a way that I hoped was a little bit closer to the way I would come across in a face-to-face workshop, and to help them feel a sense of connectedness and belonging. And that desire, I think, is captured in that quote there from a 2012 research study. And I'll show you another example from a different learning context. This is my son's class teacher, and she has the 4R morning show every morning. And she's very kindly given me permission to use this as an example. The whole thing only goes for about 4 or 5 minutes. And again, I'll just play you a really short snippet from the beginning of one, so you can see what she's doing.
Good morning students, and welcome to the 4R morning show for Monday the 26th of April. I hope you had a lovely and restful weekend and you showed your respect to our Anzacs. Now, wasn't last week crazy? There was so much new stuff there, but you all did extremely well, and if you have submitted all your tasks, I'm actually awarding you 5 extra Gojo points today, so keep an eye on your account. Now, there are a few students that need to log on to English Stars and complete activity 2s.
So some of the things I really think are thoughtful about this idea is that it shows the teacher in the classroom space, which is familiar to students, and it helps connect them with a place that they associate with learning. The familiarity of the space is probably also quite comforting for younger students whose lives have really been turned upside down. And it's one way of sustaining their sense of community and identity as a class. I've got some dot points here, but it might start the video again. So please. Okay, sorry about that. Another thing that this teacher does is, instead of a traditional roll call, she has the morning show, and every morning she asks them a different question. And then the children respond to that by submitting their answer to the online platform. So that's really nice. The children they can do it in their own time. They can fit in with family rhythms, particularly families when they have a number of children at home doing home learning at different ages and stages. So for example, one day she asked if they could make the sky any colour, what colour would they make it and why? Another thing that she has done is get the children to record themselves at various times, doing just little things like telling a joke or introducing the class to their pet or something like that. And then she incorporates those little video snippets into the morning show. And it gives the children a chance to see themselves and to see one another. And she does this using her iPad and iMovie. And I know certainly at the beginning it was probably quite time consuming for her, but I think over time she's been able to refine her strategies there so that it's not quite so time consuming to be producing that digital content. Another way that many schools are cultivating a sense of community at the moment is through social media platforms like Facebook, which have previously been found to be effective for community building. There's a reference on the slide there. Now, the first snippet of video that I'll play you was posted on the school's official Facebook page. It's publicly available, and it targets their senior school students, so students in years 10 to 12. I'll just play you that as well.
You can walk my path, you can wear my shoes, learn to talk like me, and be an angel too. But maybe you ain't never gonna feel this way, you ain't never gonna know me, but I know you. Singing in our things can only get better.
I'm told the handball match became quite competitive in that last one. The second one that I'll play you, I came up on my Facebook feed from ABC, and I'll play this one for you.
G'day boys and girls, how you going? It's Mr. O'Brien here, and I've got an important message to talk to you about today.
Okay, what I really like about those two little videos is that they both use humour and warmth to convey to students, and more broadly, that students are important, that they are valued, and that they are missed. And I think that captures really quite beautifully so many of those qualities of positive teacher-student relationships that I touched on at the beginning of the webinar. And now that tools like iMovie are so accessible and really user-friendly, there's lots of ways that we could use those tools to create digital artefacts that can help sustain a sense of connectedness. And they don't have to be publicly available like these ones are. They could just be for one class or one year level, and maybe kept internal on the school's own network, rather than being publicly available, for example. Creating opportunities for our students to laugh is very valuable. I have heard a neuroscientist refer to something called the fun effect. So if they're laughing, they're learning. This was sent to me actually, it's a short extract from a video that's been doing the rounds on social media. So the teacher has captured different ways that she's working with her class in Zoom to get her students laughing together and to still feel connected to one another and to the class, even though they're physically and geographically separate. So here, I hope you can see, they pass a pencil around through the whole Zoom class.
Point as we go to the next slide.
Hey, yo, Max, can I borrow a pencil?
Yeah, I got you, bro.
Appreciate it, my guy.
Who's unmuted? You know you're not supposed to do that. Hey, what's going on?
So lots of fun there. That's only a small bit from a really long video that she had a heap of different strategies in there. So that's worth having a look at as well. It's interesting how TikTok is starting to be picked up. Teachers are starting to do short skills-based learning episodes using TikTok as a medium because it's really, I guess, students are enjoying it. It's relevant to young people, but it allows the integration of a whole lot of media as well. In relation to social media, I have another poll here for you. There we are. Be interested to see what you think about that one. In relation to social media, literature suggests that at tertiary level, platforms like Facebook can be used to build connectedness between staff and students and among students. This is particularly valuable for online or remote students who have found to be more invested in their learning when they feel connected to the course teaching staff. With school-aged students, there are obvious constraints around safety, but there are platforms that mimic the dynamics of social media. So, for example, Edmodo is one. It's quite widely known. Class Dojo, which is one that I've become familiar with as a parent in recent weeks. Flipgrid and Seesaw are a couple of others. Very important though, of course, teachers should only use those kinds of platforms with approval from their school, and of course be very, very careful about maintaining professional boundaries when those are being used. So just sharing the results from that poll, an absolutely bang on even split, 50-50. So very interesting indeed. Just to give you an example and a reference, if it's something that you are interested in looking at later, this book on the screen focuses only on Edmodo and talks through some of its benefits, so the privacy settings, the fact that there are embedded applications so that you don't have to be going outside of Edmodo to use things like Socrative and CodeMonkey. And it can also offer opportunities for students to collaborate with one another. That's a quote from that text from a teacher who was part of the research. And yeah, they engage in those kinds of more organic interactions that you would normally get, mimics that, I suppose, the organic interaction of a normal face-to-face classroom. And of course, while online learning opens up challenges in terms of social distance, at the same time, it also offers ways of overcoming those challenges. It almost is the answer to its own question in a way, as we've just seen, that you can use media to try and bridge that social distance. But of course, what about students who don't have that access? Maybe because they don't have internet access at home at all, because they're too young, because there's any other kind of barrier that might exist. So maintaining connectedness during home learning with those students who don't have those advantages, that is obviously going to be quite challenging, and we can't understate or ignore that. That's important. Of course, teachers, as always, do the most incredible job of rising to those challenges. Some of you may have seen these online. So teachers are making flat versions of themselves, either as avatars or photographs like the one on the left, and sending those home as a way of trying to bridge that distance between teacher and students. Some other ideas that I've encountered through friends and colleagues who are teaching and who are grappling with these kinds of issues, setting up pen pals between students and maybe rotating through those. And I guess got to remember that for a lot of young children, they don't get a lot of mail through Australia Post, so there's sort of a novelty factor there. Another idea I heard was using, again, the post, but developing and posting it around and doing a progressive story that way. So it's slower, and I think the students have to produce more writing, but that's a way, I suppose, of connecting and seeing what others have written. Shared journals, and of course, you know, phone calls when possible, particularly to check in on those students who seem to, we might not hear from, or who may not be participating or returning work. Very challenging though, to find the time to get around to all students. So really salute those teachers who have been grappling, particularly in regional and remote areas, with some of those challenges. Just a word in terms of collaborative learning. Collaborative online learning really warrants its own webinar, and there's no way I could ever do justice to it today, but this may be something that you'd like to explore further in the Q&A session at the end, as we've got Professor Robin Gillies with us as a panellist, and she's a really renowned expert in the field of collaborative and cooperative learning. So feel free to pose some questions to her about that. There are a number of models or approaches to collaborative online learning, which is another sort of dimension itself. I quite like Hahn and Hill, even though it's 2007, it's a bit older, but they identify these 3 dimensions and the factors that are part of each of those dimensions. So that might be something if you're interested in exploring collaborative online learning, both now and into the future when we're back on site. This is another book that I found to be valuable. It's an edited book with lots of different chapters that focus on different aspects of collaborative online learning. In terms of synchronous communication, just down to my last couple of slides now, you've probably seen that platforms like Zoom and Microsoft Teams and others have been in the spotlight, really rapid, widespread take-up. And now we're starting to hear about phenomena like Zoom fatigue, how exhausting it is to be in virtual meetings and seminars for long periods of time. There are people who are really successfully using Zoom and similar to teach synchronously, a little like this, using perhaps breakout rooms for small group work. Others prefer to deliver learning material by doing direct teaching via recorded narrated PowerPoints or other written and multimodal tools, and then using synchronous communication like Zoom or Teams more for discussion-based activity or a Q&A session. Whether one is better than the other probably can't be definitively stated. There's a lot of variables that teachers' pedagogical preferences, students' learning preferences, access, ease of use of technology, subject matter, age of students, all of those things. But there certainly is evidence that suggests that building in opportunities for live and real-time communication in some form can help bridge social distance and support human connectedness. There's a lot of ways that we can do that, depending on the age and needs of our learners and of our school policies, of course. These are just a few. So having virtual office hours or a Zoom cafe, focus sessions on a particular topic or skill. Some platforms use the breakout rooms. They can do small group work. And of course, touch-based phone calls, I guess particularly for students who are at risk, never stops being a valuable tool. So in closing then, things that we've explored. We know that positive teacher-student and student-student relationships support well-being and academic engagement and achievement. Face-to-face learning opens up those organic opportunities to build relationship, but in an online context, we have to be purposeful and intentional about doing it. We know that we need to choose and use words with care in written communication, and be conscious particularly of everyone's anxiety levels, and to consider how we can exploit digital tools and deploy spoken and multimodal communication to create and sustain that human connectedness with teachers and students, as well as among students and the broader community, particularly when combined with things like social media, whether it's public or in-house, and having opportunities for synchronous interaction to support human connections. Some questions for you to take away with you. One thing I'm really interested in knowing is, when we go back to normal, what practices will we keep and why? What have you found over the last few weeks that has actually worked quite well and that you intend to keep on using into the future? What's been challenging? What has surprised you? And you might like to share some of those perhaps in the Q&A, and we'll try and collate some of those and share them as well. The references will be available to you. We've got some slides there about the fields of study, which we can come to in a moment, but we might turn to the Q&A. Were there any others who would like to be there? Any other questions or comments, particularly if you have got some ideas that have worked really well for you? Please feel free to share those. In the meantime, I might hand over to Robin. Robin, if you'd like to talk to these slides. I know we have a number of prospective international and domestic students who are considering joining us for some
Okay, thank you very much, Kate. That was wonderful. Very inspirational. I'm going to adopt a lot of those digital tools as mediums for promoting connection and interaction. That's really great. Thank you. While you're thinking about the questions that you might want to pose to Kate, I'll talk a little bit about the Master of Educational Studies because I know some of you will be very interested in doing some postgraduate type work. So what I've got is just a few little slides, not very much, on what the Master of Educational Studies basically encompasses. So it has a part A, B, C and D, depending upon whether you're doing a 16-unit Masters, 24 or 32. The fields of study are the ones that I would really like to emphasise because we find in our school system that behaviour management, that's constructive, positive behaviour management, not destructive, and that's been the message that Kate's been giving positive relationships, building relationships with our young people. That's one of the major fields of study. Another one is curriculum. So if you're in science, maths, language and so forth, that might be an area that interests you. Another one is guidance, counselling and careers. Now this is not just for people who want to work in the school system as school counsellors. People with this qualification are able to go out and work in industry, in other sorts of agencies and so forth with that qualification. Leadership, the field of leadership is designed really for those people who are interested in working their way perhaps through the educational system and moving into some sort of position of leadership such as a principal, a deputy, a head of department and so forth. Supporting diverse learners is really a wonderful field of study for those who like to reach out to our young people who have a range of special emotional learning needs and so forth. Schools really look to employ people in those particular, this particular area. So that's something for those of you that are interested in investigating that. It's a field of study I'd highly recommend. And the last one is psychology education. That's really for people who have a little bit of a background in psychology. It won't give you psych registration, but it will enable you to teach psychology in our school system, which is now classified as one of the sciences in our secondary school program. So they're essentially the fields of study. And I think and I just draw your attention to the graduate certificate in educational studies. I had a potential student email me today and she said to me, I want to do some postgraduate work, but she was a little bit hesitant to embark on a Masters of Educational Studies. So she's going to start with the graduate certificate, which is essentially 4 courses or 8 points, 8 units. And when she finishes that, I have no doubt that she will articulate that into a Masters given full credit. So that's the incentive there. And then, of course, the Masters at different, with different requirements for the units of work. Now, I'm just trying to see if I can turn the next slide. Okay. So our Masters, essentially, if you are doing a 32-unit Masters, and this is really designed for people perhaps who don't have a background in education, just to give you some foundation courses that will start to excite you. And I can assure you that they're all taught by staff who are very into this particular area, very motivational, and you'd enjoy it, okay? So they're the 4 courses that you'd need to consider. If you haven't got a background in education and you need to get that little bit of background to give you enough opportunities to be able to investigate and understand what happens next. Then we have Part B, and I'm not sure whether, yes, okay, Part B, and these are essentially core courses in Part B. Sometimes you are required to only do 2, sometimes you have to do all 4, depending upon the Masters that you're enrolled in, 16, 24 or 32 points. And then, of course, the last slide deals with the fields of studies and the key people you can contact if you're interested in finding out a little bit more about those fields of study. So I'll leave that to Kate. I think that's all I need to say now, and I'll just leave it to people to respond, for you to respond to the questions that I can see that have come up in the Q&A section.
Thanks, Robin. Some good questions in here. There's one person here has asked about encouraging students to engage with learning on Zoom, that students have a tendency to keep their video turned off, so missing out on a lot of those visual cues and interactions. This is maybe a more complex issue than we might think. So when students are at home, sometimes students don't want their home to be visible to others. They may be wanting to protect their privacy, or there may be complex issues at home. So I've been part of quite a few conversations about, requiring students to put on their Zoom so that we can see their faces and interact with them. So I think this is tricky, because in requiring them to do that, there may be personal factors that could be alienating in getting students to turn on their cameras. They may feel embarrassed or not wish to. And also when the video is on, they may not have the bandwidth. So it does consume a lot of bandwidth to try and have a video running. So I guess I can only speak maybe from my own experience, which is that, and I guess to draw a little bit maybe on collaborative learning principles, maybe in opening up other ways, making use of the chat, maybe asking students or building in some kind of real-time platform, whether it's Padlet or a Google Doc, something like that, where students can post and you can see their responses coming up in real time, but without necessarily requiring them to have the video on. Because I think it's about more than just maybe our need as teachers to see their faces. And I certainly understand that. I feel that too. It's very weird sort of talking into the abyss, I suppose, where you can't see anyone's faces. But I guess we just have to be mindful of the fact that that is maybe more layered and complex than it might seem initially.
Yeah, Kate, I'd just like to say, if you don't mind, I used Zoom for the first time this semester, simply because when we were on campus, I recognise there are a number of students that still needed to have that interaction and the explanations around what was being taught and so forth. And I was really amazed at how the students really enjoyed being in the conversation, the discussions that were happening. And to the extent that I almost felt that I could step out of the Zoom discussion and let the group take over and discuss the issues among themselves. So next year, I've decided, even if we revert back to face-to-face teaching, I'm still going to have those discussion groups, those Zoom discussion groups. So I'm really pleased that you highlighted that during your presentation, because it's a tool that I hadn't used before, but I found out that the students really enjoyed it. And the feedback I got from them personally was, I really like talking about such and such an issue, because it helped me to get a better understanding of it. When people are working by themselves, they often don't have a full view of, a full understanding, a full perception that others can contribute to help them to understand what they're trying to think their way through and so forth. So that was just some of they were just some of the comments that came from different people. So Zoom is on my agenda for next year.
Thanks, Robin. There's a related question here about, so in breakout rooms, so it might not be a whole Zoom where there's a heap of, or all of the students, but in small breakout rooms, and in those breakout rooms, they're not necessarily interacting with one another. And any tips for that? I guess one of the principles in collaborative learning to try and get group interaction happening is to require the students to have done something independently first. So maybe breaking tasks down, that every student, and giving them something reasonably simple, but they actually have to produce something even if it's just a sentence, so that when they move into those breakout rooms, their first step is that they have to actually share what they have already produced and written or posted on a wall or whatever it might be. But when you do that, it has been demonstrated that that will support that interaction in small groups more, as opposed to that kind of crickets and tumbleweed where they all sort of stare at one another and who's going to start talking first. So give them something specific to do individually first, and then get them to bring that into the breakout session. So that would be one strategy that I'd suggest. Robin, would you have anything to answer to that, or any other dimensions?
Well, actually, that's really important. That's the key to that underpins successful group work, collaborative group work, cooperative group work, when individual members or small groups actually do something that they then can contribute to the larger group. When you get people working like that, where you structure a situation so everybody has to make a contribution, the students themselves will map onto that, the psychological notion of interdependence. And it's that psychological notion of interdependence that creates the momentum for successful group work. So that's what, thank you, Kate, for highlighting that.
Yeah, those principles of cooperative learning, I think, can be taken into an online environment. There are some specific things that I think we can co-opt some of those principles of cooperative learning. Just having a look at a couple of other questions here. Someone's commented, if you've got a really big class and there's no internet connection, ringing them up one by one, is that possible? Well, I guess anything's possible, but it has to be reasonable as well. People have their own families and their own lives. I guess you could maybe work on a rotation system. I know a number of schools have actually taken some of their non-teaching staff who obviously weren't their role had become maybe less busy in the absence of students. And what they've done is they've repurposed those staff during this period of online learning, gone through, pulled out every child in the school and made phone calls home to every single family. So, not every school has got that capacity or that luxury. I'm not trying to gloss over that at all, but that has been one strategy that some schools. I am also aware that there are teachers who feel quite alone in this process and just won't have the capacity to make contact. It's not humanly possible to reach out to every student one by one. Maybe, I guess, prioritising the students that we know are at risk. All we can do is our best. We can't do more than our best. I think teachers are very good at bringing their best. So I don't have a magic bullet for that problem. It's a problem. And teachers work very hard to overcome those problems.
I've seen a very interesting question here. Do you have any suggestions for handling student distractions in their bedroom setups? I find it very difficult to keep the language and discourse positive, but also deal with the student that you can see fiddling or looking away. That's a problem that a lot of teachers have to contend with, don't they? And of course, I suppose now that they've been home and parents have had to deal with that type of issue, it must be particularly challenging.
Absolutely. I think we've probably all found the memes have been circulating on social media have given us an opportunity to laugh, which we've all sort of needed. I guess I always think about the work of Bill Rogers here. Bill Rogers is an expert in behaviour management, and I was really lucky when I was a very beginning teacher in my first year of teaching a long time ago now, to go to a one-day workshop that he ran. And one of the things that Bill Rogers talks about is tactically ignoring. And I guess this is this sort of, I guess we have to triage, don't we? But setting, I guess in the first instance, setting expectations clear expectations about what constitutes appropriate online behaviour is really important, and your expectations as a classroom teacher, much as you would on the first day with a new class, I suppose. And when you have students that are fiddling or looking away, I mean, I think we probably have to tactically ignore things and work out which are the hills that are really worth dying on. If we try and pick up every single thing, we are in a different medium and in a different context. Is it reasonable to expect them to be completely focused all the time? I mean, I know I'm not necessarily always in an online face-to-face meeting, let alone a Zoom one. So I guess I suggest setting those expectations as a first step and making sure that they're clear. Practicing that Bill Rogers principle of tactically ignoring certain behaviours so that we're not constantly nitpicking and creating, you know, detracting from that positive atmosphere that we're trying to create. And then thirdly, another Bill Rogers principle is finding an opportunity to describe the behaviour to that student, not humiliating them in front of the class, but privately, whether that's via Teams or Zoom or a chat. Again, you'd have to be very careful with children and school policy. A phone call if that's more appropriate, and describing the behaviour, explaining the impact of that behaviour on you and the rest of the class, and then suggesting a way that they might be able to desist from that particular behaviour. I hope that Bill Rogers I really like his work. He's been around for a long time. I'd really recommend it. I think it's equally applicable in online.
Kate, I'd also like to add, if you don't mind, that it's virtually impossible to, if you give a child an activity to do in their bedroom, or if they're doing some learning like that, it's virtually impossible for them to concentrate from the beginning to the end. Most of us don't do it. Kate said she doesn't. I certainly don't do it. So perhaps a few minutes, 10 minutes of working on the task, and then a 5-minute break doing something different. And this actually, the research that's coming out of educational neuroscience highlights the importance of this, because it gives the brain a chance to be able to more or less process the information. And when students then come back to it, they've got a clearer understanding often of what they're intending to do. So just a little bit of a break, you know, if they're primary school children, 10 or 15 minutes focusing on something, a 5-minute break. And it might just be fiddling with their pencil case, looking at something totally different that's not the same as the task they've been doing, then back on the task.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. Really good advice. I was actually just thinking about the earlier question as well about engaging students with Zoom and not having their cameras on. I just was reminded of a colleague of mine at another university, an academic in the field of drama. And this would be for situations where you don't have those social and maybe technical barriers. But what she was doing, and I stole her idea on a couple of occasions, was she was having competitions for the best Zoom background. So, you know, you can change your background. So she had a great time with that, and got the students to vote for, you know, the Zoom background they thought was the best. Another time she got them to come in character, and people had to try and guess, you know, a character from a well-known drama play. So look, depending on your teaching area and learning area, there might be some fun ways. I think if we can make things fun, also encourage that engagement. So I'm sort of straddling maybe two questions there. There's a comment here. Thank you very much for the person who offered this, who says that they've been using Mentimeter and Lesson Up as tools to receive feedback during the classes, and also doing some cold calling as well. And looking into Flipgrid as a possible approach to getting some discussions happening. Flipgrid is something I've just been looking at as well. I'm not at all an expert with it, but I'm hoping to use that a little bit more this semester. Thanks very much for that comment. So if people want to know, Mentimeter and Lesson Up, a couple of tools that this person has used really well. There's a question here that was asked a little while ago. Are we planning to add any new courses that specifically address the needs that might arise, like delivering classes online? I don't know that there are about any new courses. I know that there are already a lot of courses that exist. So if that's something that interests you, through Italy, as in the Institute of Teaching and Learning Innovation here at the University of Queensland, there are a number of MOOCs, massive open online courses, and short courses that focus on design for online learning and online learning principles. I think they've been pretty popular in recent weeks. There's been significant take-up of some of those courses, I understand, as everyone's scrambled. I know that in a number of courses here in the School of Education, we do explore, technology as a tool for opening up learning opportunities for students across different learning areas. Something that will come out of this pandemic, maybe our students might be more mindful and more interested in that, and maybe more curious about exploring it. Certainly a lot of our students who have been on prac over the last few weeks have sort of been put into the deep end with online learning alongside teachers. And the few students that I've spoken to have said it's just been incredibly eye-opening and a really great experience. So I suspect that what will happen is that as a result of this experience, the resources that are already there will become more visible to us. And that, crisis comes from innovation. And I have no doubt that there will be more on offer, but I suspect in the short term it will be more about being attentive to the enormous wealth of support that's actually already out there, but which, because we haven't had to, we haven't necessarily pursued it. So
can I just ask you, do you think, given the fact that a number of the students have basically been doing a lot of online learning for some weeks now, do you think when they go back to school, this is something they're going to be looking for as well, to the face-to-face?
Anecdotally, I think there has been talk, some students this is really suited, and they have really enjoyed that capacity, the opportunity to work at their own pace and in their own way. Year 12s, I know, have been back on school campuses again this week, and I think a lot of them are very happy to see each other as well. So there has been some talk about a concept called reverse culture shock. As we go back to normal, actually readjusting, to being back on site and in face-to-face classes. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I suspect that, I don't know whether she's online still at the moment, but one of my current students was telling me yesterday that she has been really enjoying and has been valuing using Microsoft Teams. It was something that she hadn't really had to use before, but had found it to be really beneficial. And so that's something that she thought she would continue and take on and sustain even when things are back in face-to-face. So interesting to see how schools and teachers adapt, and whether that kind of flexibility becomes something that we start to expect. I think that's
might be one way to encourage students to do homework.
Yeah, maybe. That's exactly
each other. Share ideas.
Another question here, student-run platforms where they can meet, interact socially. Depending on the age of your students and their access to technology, they tend to not have too many trouble interacting socially on things like Instagram and other things, TikTok and various other things. I do know that Edmodo offers an interface that is very like Facebook, and have worked with teachers who use Edmodo as part of their normal practice, and use it as a safe space where there is that blurring of boundary. It's for the class, but there's also plenty of social interaction that happens, and it's also a good space for them to learn about appropriate online interactions and relationships as well. So the only one that I could probably speak to with any authority would be Edmodo. It's not student run. The question was, is it student run? But Edmodo is one platform where I have seen, that blending for school students between formal learning and social or informal learning that has been quite positive. This space moves very quickly, though. I'm sure that there's more out there that I'm not across. Yeah. Are there any other questions there? I've heard that some students with ASD have really loved and preferred online learning and decided not to return to school. Can you comment on that? I have read similar things. Yeah, I couldn't comment with any authority in terms of research. Robin, do you have any thoughts on that from your knowledge of learners with special needs?
I think this is how teachers are going to be challenged, because there will be some students who will prefer to do the online learning, and but you know, the reality is they still have to go to school. So there may be some way in which class teachers can adjust the program so that they get the opportunity to do some online learning and face-to-face learning as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. And perhaps now that we've had to do it, you know, and kind of gone through that period of grappling with the technology and having to adjust our thinking, you know, it's become a little bit more normalised. Perhaps we can work smarter instead of harder. You know, perhaps we can divide up some of these responsibilities so that we're not doing rework. No one minds doing work, but most people hate doing rework. If we can find ways of working together collaboratively as teachers, you know, perhaps then we can leverage some of these learnings to support those students. I can certainly understand why students with those kinds of learning needs really enjoy, you know, the opportunity to learn from home. Again, we just need to be mindful that those students also need opportunities to learn how to be with others and to interact. But the online space often offers ways of doing that that feel safer and more doable for those kids who have those particular needs. I think we've got one more question here. Strategy of staying connected between teachers and students when there's a problem. Yeah, struggling with weak Wi-Fi. Really tricky. I don't want to undersell that as a challenge. It's a huge challenge. I really liked those, it's better for younger students, but those flat teachers, you know, where they could actually have their teacher there, maybe posting out a little weekly update. If you have got the capacity to make a few phone calls, maybe rotating through the class and triaging, you know, the students who really most need that contact, who are most likely to kind of maybe struggle with feeling alienated. So maybe some of those examples on that earlier slide about, you know, setting up pen pals, putting out a little weekly newsletter. Maybe kids could, with parent permission, they could send in pictures of themselves doing something and collate it and share it that way through old-fashioned snail mail. It still has a place. It's work intensive. I certainly acknowledge that, and it would probably feel a bit like herding cats to try and coordinate everybody to make a contribution. So I don't want to downplay the work intensity of trying to do something like that without technology, but you could certainly do a low tech version of that. Depending, you know, on how much time you had. I think that's what it comes down to. Yeah.
Kate, I actually think that teachers are, you know, listening to each other and watching what others are doing and so forth, and hearing about what others are doing. I think it's really we're going to see a change in the way we actually teach, you know, into the future, that type of thing. And as you've been talking and responding to the questions that people have posed, I've been thinking, you know, in 12 months' time, it would be exciting to come back and have a look at how teaching may have changed over the 12 months as a consequence of this particular situation.
Absolutely. And if people who are here with us this evening are thinking about doing further research, well, I don't think you'll have any trouble finding us. I'd love to sort of see some students taking on that as a research focus. So if that's something you're interested in, There are lots of ways of doing research, including reflexively on your own practice, which can be an incredibly rich way or form of professional development. So if that's something you're thinking about, really encourage you to reach out maybe to someone here at the university and connect you with the right person and have a conversation about how you might be able to translate that professional interest into a research-based project that you can take forward. There's just one last comment here in the questions about the Zoom backgrounds, and the comment here is the different backgrounds used in video calls and people changing their backgrounds in a meeting, and that this person comments that there was an intuitive sense that being more consistent would be better, and suggests that there might be some research to support this, to rethink the alien landscapes as backdrops. I had quite independently actually come to the same conclusion. So after the initial kind of novelty of Zoom and we're playing with backgrounds, and I had backgrounds with the Backstreet Boys and Jurassic Park and all those kinds of fun things, when the kind of novelty wore off and we kind of had this dawning realization of, wow, we're in this for the long haul, I stopped doing that, and I just use my background here in my office or at home. I'm comfortable doing that. Not everybody is. And I have stayed with that consistently. So like you, Catherine, who's made that comment, that's something I have started to do as well. I sort of felt it made me more human than sort of a virtual background. But I certainly understand why people use the virtual backgrounds, and I think we have to find that balance between respecting students' right to privacy and also that human connectedness. It's not an easy balance. But thanks for the comment. I think that's really interesting. Well, I think that's it. That's all our questions. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you very much to Robin for coming on as a panelist and offering her insights. And in the background, we have some other great people from UQ who've been busy making everything run smoothly. So we would love to hear from you if you would like to explore some research opportunities, and please feel free to reach out anytime. Thanks very much, and best wishes.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks.